Hello everyone and welcome to the tutorial. In this video I'm going to be teaching you all how to make a third-person adventure game in GDevelop. Now before we get started, we're going to start by setting up by already adding two extensions that are going to be important for this tutorial. So in order to add an extension, just go to the top left into these three bars, and then all you have to do is go into extensions. And when you go into extensions, we're going to add two extensions right off the bat. We're going to first type in collision, and we're going to add 3D Collision by D8H and Pilinvaki Productions. Hopefully I said that right, but this just adds 3D collision features, added capabilities to GDevelop. So it's always good to have this in every 3D project that you make. And we're also going to add another extension by Pandako. And let's type in 3D because it adds a bunch of other 3D features to the game. Let's scroll down. I'm going to find it soon. And here we have advanced 3D features made by the one and only Pandako. As you can see, this is the list of everything that it adds. Some of these GDevelop already has, but the opacity especially is very important. There's a lot of different things that you should also add advanced 3D features to all of your 3D projects because it works with GDevelop's built-in 3D. So let's install this into the project. Now, in this tutorial series, this is a very freestyle tutorial series. We're going to be making a third-person adventure game, and I'll let you all choose the genre in a poll soon. But we're going to start by setting up the movement in this part of the tutorial and a few animations. Now, before we even add a character, let's start by adding ground. So let's add a new object in the scene objects. And every time you're adding ground, unless it's going to be terrain, which is more advanced, you want to add a 3D box, not a 3D model for your ground. And when you add a 3D box, let's just name it ground. And when you add this, we want to set a sprite for all of the faces. We have the front face, the back face. Make sure to check all of the faces on. And then let's create a file with Piskel. And all I'm going to do is just color the whole thing black. We don't need anything fancy right now. Let's click into save. And let's add this for all of the sides. And here we have all of the faces for the cube. And the other thing we want to do, since this is going to be a ground object, and we're going to be interacting with many physics objects in this series, we want to make sure that the ground itself is a physics object. The way that we do this, we go into behaviors, and then we go and add a new behavior. And when we add a new behavior, all we have to do is type in 3D physics. Type in 3D physics. Spelling that wrong, but I don't know why I'm spelling this very wrong. But here we have 3D physics, and we're going to scroll down until we see 3D physics engine. This is what you want. And since the ground object is not going to move, make sure you set it to static because dynamic will move. And kinematic, it won't move unless you add a force to it. But we want this to never move. So we can keep everything else the same, and let's hit apply. Now, when we drag this ground onto the scene, what we want to do is click into it and just stretch it out on all sides so we can have a lot of area for our player to walk on in the future. Stretch it out using these nodes here. And this seemed pretty good right here. It's pretty good. So now that we have the ground, the next thing we want to do is add our 3D model for our character. And let's add a new scene object. And since we're going to be having a special character, we want to add a 3D model because it's easier to do it with cubes, but all people don't want to make games with basic cubes. So you need to know how to use 3D models in GDevelop so you can make more advanced games. So let's add a 3D model, and let's name this model Player Model. And I'm naming it Player Model for a reason instead of the player itself, because the player itself is going to be a cube, but I'll get into why it's going to be that later. So let's go into 3D models. I'm going to choose a file from my device, and this will be in the description. It'll be in the link. You can download the exact same one I'm using. I'm going to go into my desktop and simply get version 2. This is just a 3D model of a cat that I made. Now, mind you, I did not know how to 3D model this cat is AI, but we're not going to get into that right now. Now, when we add the 3D model of this cat, you see he's T-posing, and we're not going to add anything yet. We're just going to keep him at this size right now. Let's hit apply. Now, when we drag him onto the scene, let's see what's going on. First of all, we see that he's facing us, like upwards, and we're going to want to change that. We can also see that he's kind of small. Now, for the sake of simplicity, of course, when you're making your own game, you want to edit your own sizes. But I already have the proper player sizes that we're going to need. So I'm going to change the width to change it to 202. I'm going to change the height to 187, and I'm going to change the depth to 38. And this should be good. As you can see, he is actually kind of like a bigger size now. And I'm also going to change the player's rotation to -90 on the X rotation, and I'm going to change to -90 on the Z rotation as well. So now we can see that he's kind of standing upright. And when we try to drag him onto the ground, you'll see that he's under the ground. And the reason why is because Z in 3D changes the height of the object. So we want to change the Z to like something 200. And now he'll actually start off over the ground. So if I preview, we're not going to have a working game yet because we haven't added any behaviors or events to make him actually start moving. So I think see we have just a cat right now. And we do have even a little bit of lighting because I kept the shadows on the object. You could remove if you want to. I'm just going to keep it. It looks pretty good like that. But we're looking at the game from the top-down view. And that's because we haven't actually added the camera yet. But before we add the camera, we're actually not going to add the camera to the player model. And the reason why is because let's say we double click into this player model. We look at the model, and when it comes to GDevelop 3D models, we don't have a way to edit the hitbox yet. So the hitbox, or the thing that's actually going to be moving, is a cube object that's going to eventually be invisible. And what we're going to do is make sure we align this 3D model to the cube object. So this is not the actual player. That's why I called it the player model. So this player model is not going to have any behaviors added to it. Let's hit apply. Let's just save the project really fast. Now let's add the real player. Let's go ahead and add a new object. And this is going to be a 3D box because we can have the hitbox easier to edit here because hitboxes are not very good with 3D models. We're going to name this the player because this is going to be the one doing all of the actual moving. We don't want to cast any shadows because this object will eventually be invisible anyway. So we don't want this to be seen. No shadows. And we're going to activate all the faces because we will need to see it for to start off so we can align everything. And now let's create a new object with pistol. Now it doesn't matter how it looks, but make sure that it's a solid cube. I'm going to make this a whole red cube and we're going to save it. And once again, we're going to add all the faces very quickly, so I'm going to speed this up. And now we have all the faces for the cube. Now, before we add a bunch of behaviors, make sure that we don't accidentally click out of it. Let's hit apply. We save all of our progress first. Now let's double click back into the player. Now we want to go into the behaviors tab and we want to add a few different behaviors. Now the first thing we're going to do, and this is very helpful in GDevelop, if you're trying to make a controllable character who's going to be controlled by the keyboard or even WASD, there's a very helpful extension that will help you control 3D characters that are kind of like platformer-ish. So I'm going to add a new behavior, and I'm going to type in physics character 3D mapper. So let's go down until we find it. So we have 3D platformer keyboard mapper. This is the one that we want. And make sure that has a keyboard symbol because there's a different one that's for controllers. But this is the one that we want right here. When we click into this behavior, you'll see that automatically adds 2 extra behaviors that are needed. It adds the physics 3D behavior, and it also adds the physics character 3D behavior. And if you want to learn more about both of these, I have a tutorial on how to make a 3D physics platformer. You can go watch that if you don't understand it. So I'm not going to go all the way into how these work right now, but mainly what we're worrying about is this right here, the platformer keyboard mapper. Now this is completely fine of what we have right now because it's controlled by WASD. But let's say you want to switch it to arrow keys, you can switch it to something like up. It'll automatically auto-complete it for you, which is good because you should not do that. But now it auto-completes for you. So we're going to just keep everything the same, WASD, and we're going to hit apply. Now, let's see what happens when we drag the player onto the scene. And let's also set this Z to be 200 so it can start over the ground. Let's drag it onto the scene. and preview it. Now, when we drag it onto the scene, we're still in a top-down view because we haven't added a camera. But if I use WASD, you see that I can actually control my player. This is what's going to be happening. So basically how it's going to work is that we're going to be controlling this invisible player, but the 3D model is going to be aligned to follow this position and to follow the rotation of the object. So it looks like we're controlling the cat, but in actuality, we're controlling the cube and the cat's just following it. So let's just keep that the same right now. So in order to get out of this top-down view, let's click back into our player, double-click it, go to behaviors, and let's add another very useful extension, which is the third-person camera extensions. Add a new behavior, delete everything. Let's put third-person camera. Now that we have the third-person camera, we have different parameters. I've also covered this in the past as well. We're not going to dive too deep into all the properties of it. But right now, I think everything is fine. So let's hit apply. There might be one thing we have to change. Let's just, yeah, we need to change that. Automatically rotate it. So let's double click into the player, go into behaviors, then scroll all the way down and do not automatically rotate the camera with the object. Because we're going to be wanting to control the rest of the camera with a mouse in a later part. So that's why we don't want to do this right now. So right now, we can turn around like this. Can't see behind us yet. We're going to be controlling it with the mouse later. So now that we have the player moving, we need to now align the cat with the player object. So before we do that, let's set the player object to be a proper size. Once again, I already have the sizes set up already, so we don't have to keep doing a trial and error. But if you're doing your own 3D object, you're going to have to use a lot of trial and error in order to get the right size. But for me, I have 53 for the width, I have 86 for the height, and we have 215 for the depth of the object. And now if I preview, and I stand side by side with the cat, if I stand side by side, it's kind of fitting. Now it's a little bit too tall, I'd say, but we don't have to have everything perfect right now. It's completely fine right now. We don't have to have everything. So we're going to actually get into adding some events now that will help with it. All right, so now it's time to get into aligning the player model with the actual player itself. So we're going to need to head into the events. And this is going to be quite simple to understand. All we're going to be doing is aligning the player's position and aligning the angle to match the player's position and the player's angle. So basically what I'm saying, the model position and rotation will match the actual player's position and angle. Let's add a new event, and we're going to want this to always happen. So we're not going to add a new condition here. We're going to keep the condition blank. Let's add an action. Now, remember, this is the player model right here. So we want to click into our player model and change the X position. We're going to go into X position, or we can actually just go into position so we can change both at the same time. We want the X position to be equal to same position as the player. So we're going to put player and then put dot since we want to access a part of it. And we're going to put dot X. Then we're going to put the parentheses. And we're going to do a similar thing for the Y. But for my testing, it's better to do player.center Y. You could also do player.center X too. But player.center Y. So let's go down, click enter. Well, let me just type the rest of it, center Y. And now we have the X position matching the X position. And we have the Y position of the player model matching the center Y position of the player. Let's click OK. And now that we have the X and Y position matching, we also want the Z position to also match. So we're going to add another action. We're going to click into the player model. We're going to type in Z. And if we scroll down, we see Z or the elevation. And we want this to be equal to player.z. And then we're going to put parentheses here. We're going to click OK. And now we also want to do something extra. Now we saw that earlier. If I go into my extensions, we added the collision 3D. And we're going to need this because we want the player model to never be clipping into the ground. Always supposed to be separated, just how our player object is separate from the ground. So this is not this is object. This will not happen naturally. So that's why we added 3D collision, so we can separate the objects. So the way that we separate 3D models or 3D objects from each other is we just add a new action. We're going to click into the player, and we're going to type in separate objects. Now make sure to put separate objects in 3D and not regular separate objects because that's 2D. You want to click into that. And now you want to select the object that won't move. And the object that won't move is the ground itself. We don't want to be pushing back the ground. So the object that won't move is the ground, and that's all you have to do to set it up. Click OK, and now the player will never be clipping into the ground. Now, the last part of the alignment that we want to do is we want to align the angle. Now, we can't simply do player.angle because our natural position, if we put player.angle, is going to be misaligned because of our natural rotation on the y-axis, not on the y-axis, on the x. And I'm just going to show you by example right now. So let's go into our untitled scene events. Let's add another action. And since we want the Z rotation to be matching, what we're going to do here is click into the player model, type in angle, because there's no Z rotation to assets. If I type in Z rotation, you'll see that you get nothing. You get nothing that's related to Z rotation. The only thing you have is turn around on Z axis, and that's something completely different. But you don't need that because Z rotation is the same thing as the angle. So you could just use angle. And we can set it to being equal to player.angle. But if we do this, we're going to run into a problem immediately. Click OK. Let's preview this. And you see that if I turn around, if I'm moving forward, you see that my rotation is kind of on an offset. So it's not really working correctly. My rotation is on a very big offset. And we can see that also our player object needs to be higher up. So that's where the trial and error comes in. Our player object needs to be much higher up on the ground. So let's X out of here. And what we want to do is just minus 90 because we look at our Z rotation of the player right here. It's minus 90 and the real player is 0. So now we need to offset it by player model will always be equal to the player's angle, but minus 90. So now if I click OK and then I preview it now, you'll see that I'm actually facing everywhere where the player is facing. So now we need to fix the elevation not being high enough. So all I have to do is go into player.z. We just use a little bit of trial and error. We put player z plus maybe let's say 40. Okay. See if our feet are on the ground. Not yet. Maybe plus 50. And let's preview this again. Not quite, but let's do plus 6, plus 80. I'm just going to keep doing trial and error. I might not get it perfect because I don't want to waste too much time, but you know what you have to do personally to get it matched up. You just need to keep doing trial and error until you have it perfectly matched up the way that you want. So let's try 90. And this is good enough for right now. Yeah, looks really good. We can even jump around and our player's rotation matches. Now, since we have the alignment pretty good, all we have to kind of do is shrink the size a little bit, but we're not going to worry about it too much when it comes to the player's hitbox. Now we want to make it so the cube itself is now invisible. Let's add a new action and make it invisible. So click into our player, because this is what we want to set invisible. But we have to change the opacity in 3D, and that's why we added the advanced 3D features. So if I look down, and let's try to find, let me just type in opacity. We can change the opacity of a 3D object using advanced 3D features. So I click this, I'm going to set it equal to, and we're going to put it to 0. Let's click OK. Now if I preview, all we see is the cat. All we see is the cat. And now the last thing we have to do is actually set up the animations for the cat so it's not just a static T-pose. So now since it's time for us to set up the animations, we first need to go back into our scene. And let's double click into our player model. And you may be wondering, how do we access the actual animations? Because there are animations attached to the 3D model that I made here, or that maybe AI made here. And if I add an animation, I already have it preset. And I will be making a tutorial soon on how you can add your own animations using Mixamo or any rig if you actually know how to rig. So you can add your animation to a file and turn it into a GLB. Because GLB is the only file that GDevelop supports currently. So I'll be making a tutorial on how to add your own animations to objects soon. But for now, I already have it pre-set up so we don't have to go into all the technicalities of it. It'll take over 30 minutes probably. hour. So let's go into our idle. We want to set an idle animation. This is going to be the default since animation 0. Make sure as a best practice, name your animations so they're easy to access using names. Let's click into loop. We're going to add another animation. We're going to have this at the running animation as animation number 1. Type in running. And we also want this to loop when we're running. And we're going to add one more animation. This animation is going to be called jump. Choose the animation, jumping. Might as well keep it consistent. And we don't want this to loop because we don't want them to jump once and then the animation keeps playing. We don't want the jump animation to loop. So right now, this is all good right here. We're going to hit apply. And now that the animation are added, now we have to actually activate them. Now I've did similar animation activating, I believe so, in my 3D platform tutorial. I may have not did that, so let's just do it again anyway, because we're going to have to do this for tutorial anyway. So we want to set up the animation for if our player is idle. And there's 2 conditions for if our player is idle. We can read in English. If the player is not moving and if the player is on the ground, then we set the animation be idle. So let's add a condition, go into our player, and let's see if it's moving. Let's type in moving. We want to see if it's not moving, so let's invert the condition. And we're going to add another condition. We're going to type in other conditions, search up and we've did this many times. But if you're new to GDevelop, you just type in and for another subcondition. And let's add a subcondition. And remember, we want to check if the player is not moving and if it's on the ground. So let's type in ground. Might have to just type in ground. Floor. Is on floor. And let's see, we want to check if it's on the floor. So what we're checking here is that if the player is not moving and if the player is on the floor, then we want to set the animation to being the idle animation. Let's add an action. Click into our player model, not the player, because the player model actually holds the animations. Player model, type in animation, and we want to change the animation by the name. Could do the number, but name makes it easier to read your events. Let's go into animation name, go into idle. Click OK and preview. And right now we have it so our player idle. And our animations have kind of offset a few things now that we have animations. So let's set the player Z to let's get rid of the 90 and see if it's better. Preview it here. And that works much better now that he's offset it. Now it's not 100% perfect. You can see his feet are kind of floating, but we're not going to go too far into trying to get it 100% perfect right now because we're trying to do the tutorial. So now we have the idle animation set up. We also want to set up the running animation. Let's copy this because it's going to be very similar. We're going to paste this entire event. And the same thing, but we're going to change one condition. We don't want to check if the player is not moving. Now we want to check if the player is moving. Let's double click into that condition. Let's uninvert it, or just invert it again. And now we're checking if the player is moving and if the player is on the floor. Now we want to set our animation to being the running animation. Let's preview. And here we have it. We have him running. And when I put -5, it definitely helped with the alignment a lot. You can see that now we have a player actually running around on the ground. I might have to put -10. Those feet are still bugging me, but we're not going to get into it too much. Okay, we have the running setup, and we're going to set up one more animation for this part. And I definitely want to set this up because this is going to show us something very important. Now, let's set up the jumping animation. And all we have to do is check if the player is jumping. So let's add a new event, add a condition, go into player, and then type in jump. And we want to check if it is jumping. Click OK. If the player is jumping, then we want to change the animation to being equal to jump. Let's go into the player model, type in animation. We want to change the animation by the name and go into jump. Now something very funny is going to happen. If I preview this, and right now we see the running works correctly, the idle works correctly. But if I jump, see that the jump is really, really slow. And the solution for this is to change the speed. But when we do this, this is going to lead to another problem. Let's change the animation speed scale of the player model. So let's type in the player model, go into animation. We want to go into the animation speed scale. Now I've already tested this by myself. 2.5 is pretty good for this animation because certain animations that you get are just different speeds. So you're going to have to change a few things. Make sure to drag it above to change animation because remember, GDevelop reads the events in a top-down order. So we want to change the speed before it actually starts jumping. Let's go in preview. And if I jump again, see that's at a much faster speed. But now everything else is at a much faster speed because I changed the animation speed scale. So now he's running about as fast as Sonic. We don't want that. Let's go and X this out. And now that we have this X'd out, we want to change the animation speed scale to 1 every time it's idle or running because those look fine by default. So we want to keep it back. We want to set it back to 1. So when we change the animation speed scale, we're multiplying it. We're multiplying the speed by 2.5. That's why it says scale. So we want to set it back to 1 to be the original one. So let's copy this action and let's paste it down here. Let's paste it up here. Let's drag it above. Make sure to drag it above. And let's change 2.5 to 1. And let's change 2.5 down here to 1. But once again, what we're doing here is that the animation speed scale, it finds the original speed of the animation and then multiplies it by this number. So that's why this is faster because it gets the original speed of the player's animation and then multiplies it by 2.5. So we take the original speed and multiply it by 1, it'll be 1 again. Let's preview this. And now if I jump, the jump is pretty fast, but I like it like that. You jump, it looks fast, it looks regular. But when I run around, it's also regular. So here we have the first part of our 3D adventure game. Now, this is a very freestyle series. So I'd like to hear down in the comments. I'm going to have also polls on my channel. Make sure to comment down below what features you would actually like to see in the third-person adventure game. Any features can be included because third-person adventure games are one of the broadest genres with the least rules. So a lot of things can fit, such as things like combat, things like day and night cycles. You have survival elements, have more platforming elements. We have all sorts of things that you can add in a third-person game. But if you did enjoy this video, if you haven't already, make sure to like, subscribe, comment down below of what you'd like to see next in GDevelop or anything just particular in game development in general. So comment down below that. And if you like this tutorial as well, make sure to tune in for part 2 as well. Once again, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next tutorial.